If those things bite another handler, put them down. Director Valer Kess said it casually, like he was discussing broken equipment instead of 3 frightened living creatures. Caleb Walker stopped just inside the xenobiology classroom and looked across the polished floor at the containment enclosure. 3 black-furred cubs huddled against the far wall, each about the size of a German shepherd, 6 legs tucked tight beneath them. Around Caleb, cadets from a dozen worlds turned to stare at the new human instructor. Most stood a head taller than he did. Several had natural armor. One had claws longer than Caleb's fingers. A cadet near the front glanced at Caleb's species profile floating above the lecture table and laughed. No claws. No venom. No dermal plating. This is the Death World specialist. A few others joined in. Caleb set his coffee beside the console. Morning to you, too. Kess stepped forward, tall and silver-skinned, wearing the dark academic robes of Veyrath Interstellar Academy. Cadets, Mr. Walker represents an interesting evolutionary contradiction. Humans developed on a Class 12 death world despite possessing remarkably few natural defensive adaptations. We call those pants where I'm from, Caleb said. A couple cadets laughed. Kess did not. Human humor, often deployed when physical dominance is unavailable. Caleb let that one pass. He had spent 12 years in Army search and rescue before accepting the exchange assignment, and one lesson had stuck with him. People who needed everyone to know they were in charge usually hated silence more than disagreement. So Caleb watched instead. The cubs were not watching the cadets. They were watching the doors. Every time machinery hummed in the hallway, all 3 lifted their heads together. What are they? Caleb asked. Dr. Lyra Van, a blue-skinned xenobiologist standing beside the enclosure, answered. Varkesh juveniles. Omega-class predators. Recovered 4 days ago near the northern ridge. They've attacked 2 handlers, Kess added. Predatory aggression begins almost immediately after birth. Caleb walked closer, stopping about 10 feet from the barrier. The largest cub backed away. The smallest pressed itself against the others. Caleb noticed untouched food, scratches around the lower door seal, and 3 sleeping depressions clustered tightly together. How long since they ate? 31 hours, Lyra said. Medication? None. Noise exposure? Kess sighed. Mr. Walker, they are predators, not frightened house pets. Caleb crouched slowly. One cub made a low sound. He stopped moving. I know. Then perhaps you understand why distance is advisable. Caleb studied the enclosure another moment. He had seen scared dogs under collapsed houses, injured wildlife beside highways, and terrified animals people called vicious because fear looked ugly from the outside. Still, this was not Earth. He reminded himself of that. Different planet, different biology, different rules. He could be completely wrong. Lyra noticed his expression. What do you see? I'm not sure yet. That answer surprised her. Kess smiled. Finally, some scientific humility. Caleb ignored him. His attention had shifted to the bottom of the containment door. The scratches were fresh, but they pointed inward. The cubs had not been trying to escape. They had been trying to reach something outside. Caleb stood. Where exactly did you find them? Lyra pulled up a map. Northern Ridge. Roughly 18 miles from the academy. And their mother? Kess folded his hands behind his back. There is no evidence an adult survived. Caleb looked at the 3 cubs. A distant mechanical vibration passed through the building. Instantly, all 3 stood and faced north. Caleb's easy expression disappeared. Yeah, he said quietly. There is. Caleb did not touch the enclosure controls. That was the first thing Lyra noticed. Most handlers approached a frightened animal by trying to control the animal. Caleb controlled himself instead. He lowered his shoulders, stepped away from the barrier, and pulled a chair across the floor until he was about 12 feet from the cubs. Then he sat down sideways. What are you doing? Lyra asked. Being boring. That is a recognized human technique. I have been practicing for 34 years. Lyra almost smiled. Director Kess did not. We have already attempted passive exposure. With 6 armed handlers standing over them. Caleb asked. They are dangerous. Then stop giving them reasons to think you are dangerous. Kess started to answer, but Caleb raised one finger without looking at him. The smallest cub had moved. Barely. One paw slid forward, then another. Its dark eyes stayed fixed on Caleb. He kept his hands loose on his knees. 5 minutes passed. Then 15. Cadets grew restless and began leaving for their next classes. Kess remained because walking away would look like surrender. Lyra remained because curiosity had gotten the better of her. After 40 minutes, Caleb quietly asked, "What have you been feeding them?" Lyra showed him the nutritional profile. Synthetic protein formulated from Varkesh tissue analysis. Caleb studied it. Temperature, 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Try warming it. Kess gave a dry laugh. Based on what evidence? 3 babies sleeping in a pile when this room is 78 degrees. Caleb nodded toward the enclosure. Maybe they associate food with body heat. Lyra considered that, then adjusted the feeder to 98 degrees. The scent changed almost immediately. The largest cub lifted its head. Kess stopped smiling. Lyra placed the tray near the enclosure entrance and backed away. The smallest cub approached first, cautious and low. It sniffed the food, tasted it, then began eating. The other 2 followed. Lyra stared at her tablet. 31 hours, she whispered. They refused everything for 31 hours. They were not refusing food, Caleb said. They were refusing something that did not feel like food. Kess stepped toward the barrier. Coincidence. The largest cub instantly backed away from the tray. Caleb noticed. So did Lyra. Kess noticed them noticing. Open the observation gate, he ordered. Lyra looked up. Director, they just started eating. Which makes this the ideal time to test territorial response. A section of the transparent barrier slid aside, exposing a narrow assessment corridor. Kess activated a training probe. The floating device moved toward the cubs, emitting the sharp pulse Academy researchers used to provoke measurable reactions. All 3 scattered. The smallest became trapped between the probe and the wall. Turn it off, Caleb said. The test requires completion. Kess. The director increased the probe speed. The cub tried to retreat, found nowhere to go, and made a terrified sound Caleb recognized without needing any alien biology degree. He was moving before he consciously decided to. Caleb crossed through the observation gate. Lyra grabbed for his sleeve and missed. Caleb, wait. He stepped between the probe and the cub. The machine stopped inches from his chest. Kess stared at him. You have entered an Omega containment area without protective equipment. Caleb reached behind himself and switched off the probe manually. Then I guess we are both collecting useful data today. Behind him, the cub went silent. Caleb slowly lowered himself to the floor. He did not reach back. He did not turn around. Several seconds passed. Something warm touched the heel of his boot. Lyra's eyes widened. The smallest cub had curled against Caleb's leg. Kess's face changed, not with wonder, but with humiliation. Caleb saw it, and for the first time since arriving at Veyrath, he realized the cubs were not the only ones in that room who felt cornered. For the next 2 days, the smallest cub followed Caleb whenever Academy protocol allowed him inside the enclosure. It never climbed on him or begged for attention. It simply stayed close, usually settling beside his boots while the other 2 watched from a few feet away. Caleb liked that arrangement. Trust, in his experience, worked better when nobody tried to collect it too quickly. Lyra began joining him during the morning feeding sessions, carrying coffee from the human cafeteria, because she had decided the smell was pleasant even if the taste was, in her words, deeply disappointing. You realize half the Academy thinks you have some secret human ability, she said one morning. Caleb glanced at the cub beside him. I warmed up lunch. That explanation is apparently less interesting. Usually is. Outside the enclosure, cadets had started gathering behind the observation glass. Yesterday, they had laughed at the human instructor. Today they were taking notes. Director Kess noticed the change immediately. He entered without greeting anyone and placed a data tablet on the console. We are conducting a controlled response demonstration. Lyra frowned. They have only been stable for 48 hours, which provides an opportunity to determine whether Mr. Walker's presence is actually relevant. Caleb stood. What kind of demonstration? Kess activated the room controls. A low vibration moved through the floor. All 3 cubs raised their heads. A territorial stimulus. Caleb looked toward the ceiling speakers. Turn it off. You claim their behavior is driven by fear rather than aggression. Let us test that claim. A deep recorded call rolled through the enclosure. The cubs immediately crowded together. Caleb did not need Lyra's instruments to recognize panic. That sound, he said. What is it? Lyra checked the file identifier, and her expression tightened. Adult Varkesh challenge call. Caleb looked at Kess. You are playing a threat signal to 3 separated juveniles. I am collecting behavioral data. You are scaring them. Kess turned toward the watching cadets. Observe how quickly supposedly social behavior collapses under predatory stimulus. The recording sounded again. One cub rushed toward the far side of the enclosure, searching for somewhere to hide. Caleb walked to the control panel and shut the audio off. Silence returned. Kess's voice became dangerously calm. You do not have authority to interrupt my experiment. Then write me up. This is not an army rescue unit on Earth, Mr. Walker. No. On Earth we have paperwork for this too. A few cadets failed to hide their smiles. Kess saw them. That was the moment something changed. His argument was no longer about the cubs. It was about the room. About who the students believed. About whose judgment carried weight. Kess tapped his tablet and sent a file to Lyra. She read it once, then again. Director, this transfer order says Behavioral Weapons Laboratory. Caleb's expression hardened. Transfer. Tomorrow morning, Kess said. The juveniles will be relocated to a facility equipped for more rigorous study. Lyra lowered her voice. Their stress levels are already unstable. Transport could undo everything we have accomplished. Then perhaps Mr. Walker should say goodbye. Kess walked out. The cadets quietly dispersed after him. Caleb remained beside the enclosure until the room was empty. What happens at that laboratory? He asked. Lyra hesitated. That hesitation told him enough. Lyra, they test threat response, conditioning, deterrent systems. It is legal. That was not what I asked. She looked at the three cubs. Animals classified Omega rarely return to academic programs. Caleb rubbed a hand across his jaw. Anger would be easy. Anger would also accomplish nothing. Can we stop the transfer? Not without evidence that Kess misclassified them. A warning tone suddenly sounded from Lyra's tablet. She checked the screen. That is strange. What? Perimeter sensor failure. Northern Ridge. A second alert appeared. Then a third. Caleb looked toward the enclosure. All three cubs were standing now, perfectly still, facing north. Lyra whispered, Caleb. Somewhere beyond the academy walls, 18 miles away, something had just crossed the outer perimeter. The fourth perimeter sensor vanished from Lyra's display before either of them spoke. Not offline. Gone. 1 second it was transmitting from the northern ridge, and the next there was nothing but an empty marker. Then the academy alarm came alive. Security condition amber. All cadets returned to designated shelters. Caleb was already moving toward the observation window. Beyond the academy's silver towers, miles of dark grass rolled toward a line of black mountains. Can you pull the sensor recordings? Lyra opened 3 feeds. The first showed an empty ridge. The image shook. Something enormous crossed the camera too quickly to resolve, and the feed ended. The second drone lasted longer. A black shape moved through the grass below it, covering ground with terrifying speed. 6 legs. Heavy shoulders. Then the drone spun toward the sky and lost transmission. Lyra stared. Adult Varkesh. Caleb looked back at the cubs. They were no longer frightened. All 3 stood at the northern side of the enclosure, making soft sounds he had never heard before. The doors opened behind them. Kess entered with 6 academy security officers. Clear the laboratory. You found it, Caleb said. We identified an Omega-class predator approaching from the northern preserve. She is not approaching the preserve. She is leaving it. Kess ignored him. Security teams are establishing a defensive perimeter. Lyra enlarged the tracking map. A red path cut almost perfectly south. Caleb pointed at it. There is livestock 4 miles east. Water here. Maintenance crews here. She passed all of it. Predators do not require immediate hunger to hunt. She is not hunting. A sharp tone interrupted them. An academy shuttle transporting maintenance workers had made an emergency landing 7 miles north. Security footage appeared on the main display. Cadets hurried from the disabled shuttle while officers formed a defensive line. The adult Varkesh emerged from the grass less than 200 feet away. Someone raised an energy rifle. Do not shoot, Caleb said, though nobody on the recording could hear him. A warning pulse flashed across the field. The Varkesh changed direction instantly. It raced toward the defensive line, and the officers scattered behind armored vehicles. For several breathless seconds, the creature disappeared from view. Then it emerged on the opposite side of the landing site and kept running south. It had not chased anyone. It had simply forced its way through. Caleb pointed at the screen. There. She had people in front of her and did not pursue them. Kess folded his arms. Irrelevant. It is the opposite of irrelevant. Another alert sounded. The Varkesh had crossed the 12-mile marker. Lyra looked from the map to the Cubs. At its current speed, it could reach the Academy in less than 20 minutes. Kess turned to security. Deploy heavy deterrent units around the central complex. Caleb stepped into his path. Move the Cubs somewhere quiet and open the northern access route. Kess stared down at him. You are suggesting we invite an Omega Predator onto Academy grounds. I am suggesting you stop standing between a mother and the reason she came 18 miles through your security system. For the first time, Kess hesitated. It lasted only a second. No. We will contain the adult and proceed with tomorrow's transfer. Caleb's eyes narrowed. You still want to move them? More than ever. A living adult provides the control subject we were missing. Lyra looked at him in disbelief. Control subject? Kess walked to the tactical console. On the map, he dragged the Cub transport route away from the laboratory and placed its destination directly in the Academy's central courtyard. Caleb understood immediately. You are using them as bait. Kess confirmed the order. Outside, security vehicles began racing toward the courtyard. Inside the enclosure, all 3 Cubs suddenly called out at once. A second later, from somewhere beyond the northern walls, a deep answer rolled across the Academy. Caleb read the courtyard order twice, hoping he had misunderstood it. He had not. 3 juvenile Varkesh were being moved into an open containment pen at the center of the Academy, while automated deterrent turrets formed a circle around them. Cancel it, Caleb said. Kess did not look away from the tactical display. The operation is already underway. You put the babies in the kill box. Juvenile predators. Caleb turned toward him. His voice stayed quiet. Babies. Lyra stepped beside the director. Kess, the adult is responding to their calls. If you surround them with weapons, you are creating the threat response yourself. And once the adult enters the courtyard, we will have the first controlled observation of a wild Omega-class Varkesh protecting offspring. Controlled. Lyra pointed toward the northern map. The red marker had already crossed the 8-mile perimeter. It removed 4 sensors and passed an armed security line without stopping. Nothing about this is controlled. Kess finally faced them. This academy has studied dangerous species for 2 centuries. I will not abandon established protocol because one human spent a few hours sitting on the floor. Caleb felt the anger rise, hot and immediate, but he knew that feeling. He had met it in collapsed buildings, flooded neighborhoods, and command rooms where somebody cared more about being right than fixing the problem. Anger made people fast. It rarely made them smart. He looked through the glass as 2 security handlers entered the enclosure with a transport carrier. The Cubs backed away. I am going with them. No, Kess said. Then I am formally objecting to the transfer. Noted. Good. Put my name on it. Caleb unclipped the Academy-issued sidearm from his belt and placed it on the console. Kess glanced down. What are you doing? Making sure nobody can claim I threatened security. Caleb removed his identification badge next and set it beside the weapon. Now I am going with the Cubs. 2 officers moved toward him. Lyra stepped between them. He is the only person they currently tolerate at close range. Unless you want your controlled transfer to become considerably less controlled, let him help. Kess considered the room, the officers, and the students watching through the corridor windows. 5 minutes, he said. Then you leave the courtyard. Caleb entered the enclosure. The Cubs gathered around him almost immediately. He walked beside them while handlers guided the group through the service corridor toward the central complex. Emergency lights washed the walls amber. Overhead announcements ordered cadets into shelters. Every few seconds another distant alarm joined the first. Caleb. Lyra hurried up behind him. The adult is 5 miles out. How fast? Faster. They reached the courtyard. It was nearly 200 feet across, surrounded by lecture towers and elevated walkways. At its center stood a temporary barrier containing food, water, and absolutely nowhere for 3 frightened animals to hide. Caleb looked up. 8 automated turrets tracked silently from the rooftops. He built a shooting gallery, Caleb muttered. The Cubs pressed against his legs. Lyra checked her tablet. 3 miles. Caleb studied the northern gate, then the courtyard exits. Can you control that enclosure from here? Yes. When I tell you, open it. Lyra stared at him. Kess will remove me from the program. Probably. That was not reassuring. Was not meant to be. The Academy speakers suddenly changed tone. Security condition read. The northern defense line had been breached. Kess's voice came through Caleb's communicator. Walker, clear the courtyard immediately. Caleb looked down at the cubs. The smallest one was trembling against his boot. Not happening. That is a direct order. Then write another report. A tremendous impact echoed somewhere beyond the northern buildings. Students watching from reinforced windows pulled back. Lyra's tablet flashed. 1 mile, then half a mile. Kess shouted through the communicator, ordering every turret armed. Caleb looked at Lyra. Open the enclosure. She swallowed and pressed the control. The barrier slid away. The cubs did not run. They stayed beside Caleb. Then the northern gate alarm went silent. Not because the danger had passed, because something had reached it. Caleb slowly turned toward the courtyard entrance as a deep call rolled between the towers, louder than before. Lyra whispered, "She is here." The northern gate did not open. It bent inward. A warning siren cut off halfway through its next cycle, and every light along the courtyard switched from amber to red. Lyra backed toward the control station. Caleb stayed where he was. The 3 cubs crowded around his boots, no longer trembling. Their heads were raised now, ears turned toward the same dark passage between the northern towers. Walker moved. Kess's voice snapped through the courtyard speakers. Caleb ignored him. A security vehicle rolled into position near the eastern walkway, followed by another from the west. Officers raised energy rifles from behind armored barriers. "Tell them to lower those," Caleb said. Lyra opened the security channel. "Director, your officers are escalating the situation. My officers are protecting this academy from an animal trying to reach its offspring. That is your interpretation." A heavy shape appeared beyond the damaged gate. Rook stepped into the red emergency light. Caleb had seen the measurements in the academy database, but numbers had not prepared him for the real thing. Nearly 12 feet from nose to tail, 6 powerful legs, dark fur rising along shoulders that came almost to Caleb's chest. One of the officers shifted his rifle. Rook stopped. "Nobody move," Caleb said. The courtyard went strangely quiet. Rook looked toward the armed officers first, then toward the turrets, then toward Caleb. One cub called out. Rook answered with a low sound that Caleb felt through the soles of his boots. "She sees them," Lyra whispered. Caleb nodded. "Good. Now everybody needs to stop making this complicated." For 1 second, it almost worked. Then Kess activated the deterrent grid. Bright energy barriers rose across the courtyard, separating Rook from the cubs. Rook recoiled and immediately began searching for another path. "Kess, shut it down," Lyra demanded. "We have containment." "No, you have a mother looking for a door." Rook moved along the barrier, testing each section. A turret rotated overhead. Caleb looked up. Those were supposed to be deterrents. Lyra checked her tablet. Her face changed. They were. Kess changed the authorization. Caleb touched his communicator. "Director, what did you do?" Kess answered calmly. "Omega Protocol permits lethal response once a predator breaches an inhabited facility. You brought her here. I prepared for a predictable outcome." Caleb finally understood. Kess had never intended to test whether the adult could be reunited safely with the cubs. He needed the Varkash to behave exactly as his research said it would. Aggressive, unmanageable, dangerous. If Rook attacked, Kess was right. If she did not, he had arranged enough pressure to make sure she eventually would. "You are not studying her," Caleb said. "You are trying to win an argument." Kess did not answer. Rook suddenly changed direction and raced toward the western barrier. Security scattered away from the impact point as the animal cleared a low-service divider and landed inside the next section of courtyard. No one was hurt, but panic spread instantly. Cadets disappeared from windows. Officers abandoned exposed positions. One vehicle reversed so quickly it struck a fountain and stopped. Lyra grabbed Caleb's arm. "The barrier is failing." "Good." She stared at him. "Good. Every wall between her and those cubs is another reason for her to panic." Rook crossed the second courtyard section. 200 feet separated her from Caleb now. Then 150. The cubs began calling louder. Caleb could hear his own breathing. He was scared, and pretending otherwise would not change that. Every sensible instinct he had told him to get behind something solid. Instead, he took one slow step away from the cubs, giving Rook a clear view of them. "Caleb," Lyra said quietly, "the turrets are tracking her. Can you shut them down?" Lyra worked the controls. Kess locked me out. The rooftop weapons rotated together. Rook saw the movement. Her posture changed. Director, Caleb said into the communicator, do not fire. Kess's reply came without hesitation. Walker, you had your experiment. The security system announced target lock. Caleb looked at Rook, then at the 3 cubs beside him. He made his decision. He stepped directly between them and the armed turrets. Lyra went pale. Caleb, what are you doing? He kept his eyes on Rook as she lowered herself and started forward, making him choose who the whole academy sees him shoot at. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The targeting lights remained fixed on Rook, but Caleb stood squarely in their path, with the cubs clustered behind him. Hundreds of cadets were watching through reinforced windows and security feeds. Kess knew it. Caleb was counting on that. Clear the firing lane, Kess ordered. No. Walker, this is your final warning. Caleb could hear his heartbeat in his ears. Then make sure the cameras are recording. Silence answered him. Rook started forward. 100 feet. Caleb had spent years teaching frightened people not to run when panic took over. Now every muscle in his body wanted to ignore his own advice. 80 feet. The animal accelerated. Lyra stepped toward Caleb, but he held out one hand. Stay back. You do not know what she is going to do. Neither does Kess. 60 feet. Security officers retreated behind the eastern barricade. Rook was no longer watching them. Her attention had locked onto Caleb and the cubs. 40 feet. Caleb swallowed. He had been wrong before. Everybody who worked rescue long enough had been wrong. Experience did not make you fearless. It just taught you that fear and judgment were allowed to occupy the same body. 20 feet. The smallest cub slipped around Caleb's leg. Easy, he whispered. Rook charged the final distance. Lyra shouted his name. Caleb stayed where he was. Then the cub made one soft call. Rook stopped so suddenly her front paws slid across the courtyard surface. She stood less than 10 feet away. No one spoke. The largest predator on the academy grounds stared at Caleb. Caleb stared back for half a second, then deliberately lowered his eyes. There you go, he said softly. They are right here. The smallest cub walked toward its mother. Rook lowered her head and touched noses with it. The other 2 followed. The terrifying Omega predator that had crossed 18 miles of security territory became completely still while her cubs pressed around her legs. Behind the windows, cadets who had been taught that Varkash recognized only dominance watched something their textbooks had never described. Rook looked at Caleb again. He did not reach for her. He did not smile. He simply took one step backward and gave the family room. Lyra let out the breath she had been holding. You were right. Caleb shook his head. I made a good guess. That was not a guess. Trust me, it felt like one from where I was standing. A few nervous laughs came through the open security channel. Then a new voice cut across them. This proves nothing. Kess. Caleb looked toward the administration tower. 3 cubs reunited with their mother without anybody getting hurt seems like something. The adult breached academy defenses. It remains an Omega threat. Lyra checked her tablet. Her stress indicators are falling. Irrelevant. Your entire classification depends on behavioral response. I said irrelevant. The words came sharper this time. Caleb looked up at the rooftop turrets. Their targeting lights had disappeared. For one hopeful second, he thought Kess had finally backed down. Then Lyra's tablet flashed red. Caleb. He heard the fear in her voice. What? He transferred turret control to the private research network. Caleb looked toward the administration tower. Can you block it? I am trying. Rook gathered her cubs close. She had noticed the machines moving again. Caleb touched his communicator. Kess, this is over. No, Kess replied. Now we find out what your peaceful predator does when the conditions change. One turret rotated away from Rook. Then another. Caleb followed their movement and felt his stomach drop. They were no longer targeting the mother. Every weapon on the courtyard had shifted toward the 3 cubs. Rook saw it too. The first turret began to charge. Caleb did not think. He moved. He stepped between the weapon and the cubs just as Rook shifted in the opposite direction, placing her massive body around all 3 of them. For one strange second, human and predator were doing exactly the same thing. Lyra. Caleb kept his eyes on the rooftop. Tell me you have something. Her hands raced across the tablet. Kess isolated the network. I cannot reach the firing controls. Can security? Not remotely. The turret tone climbed higher. Around the courtyard, Officers looked toward the administration tower, waiting for an order that was not coming. Caleb touched his communicator. Kess, you fire on those cubs, and every person watching this will know exactly what you did. They will see an Omega Predator demonstrate its natural response. No, they will see you threaten 3 babies because your research was wrong. Kess went silent. Caleb had finally found the thing the director feared more than Rook. Not the animal, not even losing his position. Being publicly proven wrong. The turret reached full charge. Then a new voice broke across the security channel. Academy security to all units. Director Kess no longer holds operational command. Caleb glanced toward the eastern barricade. The senior security officer had lowered his rifle. Authorization? Kess demanded. Emergency Statute 9. Any administrator who deliberately redirects defensive systems toward protected research subjects is automatically suspended pending review. Those subjects are classified Omega. They are juveniles inside an academy enclosure. The officer looked directly toward one of the courtyard cameras. And yes, Director, the cameras are recording. Lyra suddenly smiled. I found the maintenance bridge. Can you shut the turrets down? Caleb asked. Better. She entered a command. The rooftop weapons rotated away from the courtyard and locked upright. Their charging tones died together. The silence afterward felt enormous. Rook remained wrapped around her cubs. Then she slowly lifted her head. Her attention moved past Caleb toward the administration tower. Kess appeared behind the observation glass several floors above them. Rook saw him. Caleb could not explain how he knew she had identified the source of the threat, but her posture changed immediately. She stepped away from the cubs and faced the tower. That is not good, Lyra whispered. No, Caleb said. It is not. Rook started toward the building. Security officers raised their weapons again. Hold fire, Caleb called. Walker, she is approaching an occupied structure. Because the person who threatened her cubs is inside it. Rook crossed the courtyard at a steady pace. Not charging, not panicking, just moving with purpose. Behind the glass, Kess backed away. Caleb jogged after her, keeping several yards of distance. Rook. The name had started as a convenient label in his head. Now he said it aloud. One ear turned toward him. She kept walking. Okay, that is something. Caleb moved slightly closer. Your kids are safe. You got them back. We are done here. Rook stopped at the tower entrance. The doors had automatically sealed during the emergency. She looked up at Kess. Kess stared down at her. For the first time since Caleb had met him, the director looked small. Caleb, Lyra said behind him, what happens now? Caleb looked toward the cubs. The smallest had left the others and was trotting across the courtyard toward him. It reached Caleb, circled his boots once, then called to its mother. Rook turned. The cub called again. Something in her posture softened. She left the tower door and returned to her offspring. Caleb exhaled. Security officers entered the administration level minutes later and escorted Kess from the control room. Nobody cheered. It did not feel like that kind of moment. Lyra joined Caleb as Rook gathered her cubs near the northern exit. The board will want an investigation, she said. Good. They will want your testimony. Caleb sighed. Of course they will. You dislike committees? I came 30 light years from Earth and somehow still ended up in meetings. Lyra laughed. Then her tablet chimed. She read the message and stopped smiling. What? Caleb asked. She turned the screen toward him. The Galactic Xenobiology Board had already received the courtyard footage. Their emergency review would begin in 72 hours. But underneath the notice was something neither of them expected. Varkash behavior was not the only classification under review. The board had added a second species to the inquiry. Humanity. 72 hours later, Caleb sat beneath the seal of the Galactic Xenobiology Board wondering how saving 3 scared animals had somehow turned into a hearing about the human species. Lyra sat beside him. Across the chamber, Kess occupied a separate table under Academy security supervision. The board had reviewed every second of courtyard footage. There was no dramatic argument left to make. The recordings showed Kess changing the turret authorization, threatening the cubs, and ignoring repeated warnings from his own staff. His removal from Veyrath was unanimous. The harder question came afterward. An elderly board member leaned toward Caleb. Mr. Walker, our records classify humans as physically vulnerable compared with most high-risk species. Yet you entered the enclosure voluntarily, remained in the courtyard during an Omega event, and placed yourself between defensive weapons and the juveniles. What? Caleb rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table. He hated questions that sounded complicated when the answer was not. They were scared. The board member waited. That is all. That was enough. Another delegate studied him. You understood that the adult could have killed you. Caleb glanced at Lyra. I understood that I could be wrong. Yet you stayed. Being afraid and leaving are two different decisions. The chamber became quiet. Lyra looked down, hiding a small smile. Caleb continued. You keep asking what humans did to control the Varkesh. We did not control anything. That was the mistake from the beginning. Kes saw an animal he could classify. The Academy saw a threat it could contain. I saw 3 kids looking for their mother. The board eventually issued a new directive. Varkesh were removed from the Omega aggression category pending long-term study. Human interaction methods would be incorporated into Academy field training, not because humans possessed some mysterious biological gift, but because their approach emphasized observation before force. Caleb preferred that explanation. It sounded less heroic and more useful. 3 weeks later, his exchange assignment ended. He stood beside a shuttle on the northern landing field with 1 duffel bag and a paper cup of coffee that Lyra had proudly learned to make almost correctly. Almost, Caleb said after tasting it. You say that every time. Because hope matters. She rolled her eyes. Beyond the fence, movement appeared in the grass. Academy security noticed it too, but nobody reached for a weapon. Rook emerged near the ridge. The 3 cubs followed her, noticeably larger now. Caleb set down his coffee. The smallest cub approached the fence, carrying something in its mouth. It dropped a scorched piece of courtyard armor onto the ground and pushed it through the lower opening. Caleb picked it up. Is that a gift? Lyra asked. Could be trash. You crossed a courtyard for that animal. Does not mean she respects my decorating choices. Lyra laughed. Across the field, Rook watched him. Caleb expected her to leave. Instead, she turned away first. The gesture meant nothing according to the old textbooks. A predator did not expose its back to something it considered dangerous. Lyra understood before Caleb said anything. She trusts you. Caleb watched Rook disappear into the grass with her cubs. Maybe. He picked up his duffel. That is usually enough. Years later, Veyrath cadets would still study the courtyard incident. Some called it proof that humans were fearless. Caleb always corrected them when he heard that version. He had been terrified. Courage was never the absence of fear, and strength was never the ability to make something else afraid of you. Sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was look at something everyone else had already labeled dangerous and ask one more question before judging it. Humanity had survived a world filled with claws, teeth, storms, oceans, and each other. Not because humans destroyed everything they feared. They learned. They listened. And every once in a while, when fear told everyone else to reach for a weapon, one human sat down, stayed quiet, and gave trust a chance to cross the distance first.